I think it's important to build something like EPCOT, or for that matter, Disney World or Disneyland, because we attract young people and old people who have made up their minds about the future. So therefore, the kids come in, as we all do at a certain age, looking for their own futures there. We go into libraries for these things, we go to movies for these things, but we go to World's Fairs. And somewhere along the line, we are passed through the experience. I look upon the EPCOT Center itself, at the very center of it, Spaceship Earth, as a kind of Schweitzer centrifuge. Schweitzer was always telling us what? That we should set examples, someone may imitate them, preferably good examples. So if you put the children in this centrifuge of Spaceship Earth and whirl them around, filled with the ideas of the far past, the immediate present, and the far future, they'll come out galvanized and care very much about getting out of bed tomorrow morning. That's what you must do for children. The educational process must do it, teachers must do it, and we must do it. And let's be there ahead of the teachers this time, huh? Let's say to the children, for God's sake, the future is worth building.
Hello and welcome to The Lowdown on the Plus Up, a podcast where we look at everyone's favorite theme park attractions, lands, textures, and novelties. We talk in, over, about, and through our week's topic, and then, with literally no concern for practicality, safety, or economic viability, we come up with ways to make them better. My name is Kelly McCubbin, columnist for the theme park website Boardwalk Times, and with me, as always, is Peter Overstreet, University Professor of Animation and Film History in Northern California. So, Pete.
Yes.
What are we talking about today?
Well, our last episode, we took our listeners on an extraordinary journey into nothingness, and it was one of our annual "What If" episodes, where we like to find proposals of theme parks that never existed, or just come up with our own suppositions as to why a particular theme park was never developed. 2 years ago, we did Fleischerland, and last week, it feels like last week, we released our episode on was it the electrical time maze? Is that what that was?
You've forgotten already. It's the Great Electric Time Maze.
See, it doesn't even exist. That's why I forgot it. Yeah. So it is based off of a proposal that was written by Mr. Ray Bradbury, one of the great science fiction authors of the 20th century, and we carried it through to its climax of waxing poetic and building wax eloquent all the way through, and it was a lot of fun to do. And some of you may be listening and wondering.
Harrowing.
Yeah, it was harrowing. But in the end, we had to let everybody off the hook and say, this does not exist, sadly. It would have been a great attraction, but it's not. And some of you may actually be wondering about the validity of some of our facts that we spewed about Ray Bradbury. And even we're wondering some of the validity of these facts.
We're going to add some air quotes to the word facts on this one.
Yeah. So we have brought an expert as who's a guest on our show today.
That's right. Yeah, just to add some credibility to the nonsense that we spewed, we have brought Dr. Phil Nichols.
Hello.
Dr. Nichols is in England, so we have this great 8-hour time gap between the three of us, but we've managed to work it out. Dr. Nichols is a university lecturer. He has so many letters after his name. Many of them I don't know what they are. I recognize master's. I recognize PhD. There's others we can get into later. He is the editor of the new Ray Bradbury Review, which puts you in a lineage with William Nolan, doesn't it?
Yes, he edited the original when it wasn't even new, when it was just called the Ray Bradbury Review, which was a kind of a one-off, really.
Right.
In the, don't know when it was, 60s, 70s? Yeah, it was then revived as an academic journal, well, semi-academic, and that's when I stepped in.
That's great. He's a senior consultant at the Ray Bradbury Center. He broadcasts 2 podcasts that I myself listen to, which is how I got in touch with the gentleman. He does Bradbury 100, which is a wonderful podcast, and with his friend Colin. He does Science Fiction 101, which is also delightful. He also does the Bradbury 101 YouTube channel. Basically, if you have questions about Ray Bradbury, this is your guy.
Yep.
So welcome.
I don't always have the answers, but I'll always tackle the question.
I can almost guarantee your answers are better than ours. So welcome. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
So let's just, as a kind of first shot across the bow, you very kindly and bravely listened to our Great Electric Time Maze episode. What did we get egregiously wrong?
Nothing. I don't think you got anything egregiously wrong. In fact, I thought you brought it to life incredibly well.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, what people need to know is that it's just a few pages of text. Well, actually, it might be about 20 pages. But
it sure feels like it, if not. It's no offense to Mr. Bradbury. He obviously had a huge block of cheese and some Schlitz beer and just typed away, just cranking away at this thing. So
I mean, what I find amazing about it is that he stuck it in this book of his called Yestermorrow, which is not a terribly well-known book, but it's a book of essays.
Yeah.
And it's in there without any real explanation of what it's there for. And so you just read it and you think, what was that? And if you'd given it some context, I think most readers would be able to make more sense of it than they can at present. I mean, it's an interesting read, but it's probably the most peculiar piece of Bradbury writing you'll ever see.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. There's a moment, I think it's maybe the last couple of lines of it, where he says something like, "And now I'm exhausted. And I have to go to bed," and it just seems like he just went, it was some like caffeine fueled mania. He was like, I'm going to write everything that I have been holding back writing about theme parks. And I'm just going to do it in this one run. And it's going to be a little bit insane. And it's going to be fascinating, really interesting, some really interesting stuff going on in there. And then just get it out of my system and put it away. And it feels like that to me.
Yeah.
He's kind of emulating Robert E. Howard there a little bit with just the first draft of Conan. It's like, you will write this, in the middle of a rainstorm in Texas.
I mean, he was known, as you said in the podcast, he was known for saying, "Don't think," and just trying to get the words to flow out of him. So I've no doubt at all that he did write it in a sort of a continuous flurry of ideas coming into his head and ending up on the page. But usually, certainly when he's writing fiction, he would go back to it later and edit.
Right.
So it wouldn't look like a first draft. But this piece is, I don't know how you found it, but I found there's quite a lot of repetition in there.
Yes.
He quite often will state an idea and then sort of rewind his steps and then say it again. And it really does feel like he did not go back and do a further draft of it. In the context of the Yestermorrow book, he sort of gets away with that because everything in that book is what you referred to last time as blue sky thinking.
Yes.
Most of the essays in there were written for an architectural company to give them inspiration. And so he was paid to come up with basically crazy ideas, which other people could then bounce off. And so one of the things that was in the Time Maze is that whole first section where the first thing you do when you enter the Time Maze is you eat.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this comes out of one of Ray's other essays, and I've forgotten what it's called, but he basically says at the beginning of this other essay, people don't go out to shop. People go out to eat. And while they are out, they shop. Now, I can see the logic of that. And I think that's possibly more true of Bradbury, who perhaps didn't like going out shopping with the family, but he loved to eat. So I can imagine that that's how he coped with shopping, is that he would go and sit in the food court or whatever, and then face up to the shopping that he had to do, which was like a chore to him. But that simple concept that we don't actually go out to shop. We go out to eat. And then while we're out, we shop.
Right.
That is what caused the invention of the food court. Think of every shopping mall you've ever been in.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's a food court.
Yeah.
And that comes from, I believe, from Bradbury's essay, which he wrote for John Jurdy architectural firm. They then built one of the earliest malls in America, which I think was probably the one in San Diego. If not that, it was in Glendale, California. And those were built either around a food court or with a food court at the heart of them. And ever since then, all shopping malls have had some kind of food court.
Yeah.
So, in a sense, Bradbury is responsible for that. Bizarre.
For better or for worse.
We're going to lay it at his feet one way or another.
We one thing that I noticed, and reading over Yes Tomorrow on the whole, which I did a couple of years ago for some other, I was looking for something else, but I found it interesting. And one of the things that kind of dovetailed for me into some other research and some other podcasts that we had done is that what Bradbury tended to propose as far as urban planning, and Yes Tomorrow is in a large way about urban planning.
Yeah.
What he tended to propose was very similar to the things that Victor Gruen had proposed, which Victor Gruen's known, much to his chagrin, he hated this, but he was known as the father of the shopping mall. What the shopping mall became was not what he intended, but I thought it was really interesting because you have this sense of, a sort of central place for a community to come. It's at least once you get there, it's very walkable, which obviously would have been very key for Bradbury, who didn't drive. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so I thought a lot of the ideas sort of dovetailed with Gruen's ideas, which we learned doing some research a little while ago that Walt Disney was also fascinated with Victor Gruen. So they have similar sort of ideas, like this is how a community should work. It should have a centralized place that you can go to that has shops and food and mainly bookstores if you're talking about Ray's writing. So we get things like the writings in Yes Tomorrow, but we also get kind of Disneyland coming out of Victor Gruen's writing, which obviously Ray was fascinated with.
Yes, absolutely. And Ray really thought that Disneyland was the template for downtown areas. He really believed that Disney had perfected that in Disneyland, the way that you have the kind of you go in through the gates at Disneyland and you're sort of on Main Street. He felt that was the perfect small town, and it reminded him of the small town that he grew up in and other places that he had seen over the years. And in fact, he even said to Disney, allegedly, he said to Disney, you should run for mayor of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Because he really thought that was a model you could apply. I think he was, there's a lot of truth in that, but I think he's also losing sight of the fact that Disneyland is a place you pay to go into.
Yes.
You expect perfection, you expect everything you want to be laid on exactly there. Whereas when you go to a town, you're not necessarily paying anything. You're getting it for free up to the point where you go in somewhere and spend money. So to me, they're not a perfect analogy, Disneyland and the small town. But for Bradbury, he saw it as a real model to follow. And he certainly was influenced in that with his own ideas. Plus, he was influenced with his notions of European cities where, you would have a central plaza, which would be surrounded by cafes, and each cafe would have seating outside as well as inside. So he kind of saw that as being the perfect model as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you read through some of the things in Yes Tomorrow, and I forget which essays in particular, but there are essays where he suggests that these town centers are places where you should be able to go to specifically without paying for anything, without even shopping or buying books or eating.
Yes. Yeah. So it is the Disneyfication the town that he wants to see.
Yeah.
But then he does add things to that. And one of the things, I don't know if you remember this from your own reading of the book, but there's an essay in there which is called something like The Aesthetic of Lostness.
Yeah.
And the idea is that when we're in a place like a shopping mall, we don't actually, according to him, we don't actually want to be able to see everything from where we are. We want to be able to go down sort of branching corridors, some of which will be dead ends, and we don't know exactly what we're going to come across when we get down there.
Right.
Now, I think there speaks somebody who, again, probably found shopping very boring, and he thought having avenues to explore would be interesting. But I don't know about you. When I go to a shopping mall, I just want to be in and out. I don't want to spend any time there. So to me, branching corridors is the worst thing you could have. But for him, that idea of being lost so that you can explore things at your leisure and backtrack and find new byways and so on, he found that very appealing. And again, that was acted upon by the John Jurdy architecture agents,
right,
in some of their mall designs. So he had an influence with this. It wasn't just theoretical stuff, unlike the Time Maze, which
which was purely theoretical. But it very much is. They are mazes. You know, they are. You are intended to get lost in them.
Yeah.
Which is contradictory with the weird narrative thing that he tries to put together in the second Time Maze.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can understand his fascination with getting lost especially in an eatery situation, because of his love for places like Clifton's Cafeteria, because he was a regular there. And I don't know if you've ever been there, Phil, but it is quite a maze, and it is like 3 or 4 stories of redwood trees and taxidermy. I mean, it's a cabinet of curiosities, is what it really is. But that's where Forrest J. Ackerman and Ray and another Ray, Harryhausen, all kind of founded their lifelong friendship together. And since Bradbury was such a regular there, that probably some of those ideas also sprung out of Clifford Clinton, who created Clifton's Cafeteria, was very much into utopic ideals, especially when it came to feeding people. Seriously, I mean, because he operated his restaurant, he would serve 50,000 people a day during the Depression.
Wow.
And he ran it by the golden rule. It's like, pay if you can, and if you can't, don't worry about it. We got you. And so, I can see Ray Bradbury definitely having some of that rubbed off on him by being exposed to that.
Yeah, I can see that as well. I mean, lest anyone think that Ray was some kind of gourmet who appreciated fine European dining or whatever. He wasn't. He was more of a junk food eater than anything else.
Yeah. I keep making jokes about Schlitz beer. I only get that because of a TV interview that he did, and he famously pulls out a plate and he slices a huge chunk of cheddar and he pops open a Schlitz and he goes right back to his typewriter and starts going. And so that's why I make that joke. But that's kind of evocative of his diet. So
this kind of leads me to a track that I'm sort of interested in. We think about Bradbury as, particularly kind of at the 50s, like the kind of the peak of his career, as a writer about old towns and Greentown and nostalgia. But talking about Clifton's and talking about urban planning, Bradbury was an Angelino. He really adapted in a lot of ways for a long time to Los Angeles. Do you have kind of thoughts about that? Is that contradictory for him?
To me, it's not contradictory because I've lived with that knowledge for a long time. But I guess if you're sort of learning about Bradbury for the first time, that would seem contradictory. To me, I think the reason it isn't contradictory is that the small town represents his past and his childhood and the nostalgia element. But the big city and the urban sprawl is the science fictional future. So I don't see them as that contradictory. And if you listen to any of his speeches or read any of his essays or interviews for that matter, you'll find that he's frequently referring back to the same touch points. He keeps referring back to King Kong. He keeps talking about dinosaurs. He keeps talking about the small town. And he will also talk about urban transport, the trolley that he used to ride in. Well, I can't remember if Waukegan actually had trolleys, but from his childhood, Chicago and Waukegan, plus the old trolleys that used to run in Los Angeles. And for years, he was an active campaigner for having a monorail in LA.
He was thrown out of a city council meeting, wasn't he, for advocating for that? Yeah.
Took some notes from John Huston, did he?
Yeah.
But it again, it relates to that thing of he didn't drive through choice. He found cars very scary because he witnessed accidents and wanted nothing to do with driving. So to him, having a monorail system or any form of urban transport would have been ideal. But for some reason, the monorail is the particular form that he always fancied. Maybe because of Disneyland, I don't know.
I have to expect it was because of Disneyland. And as I understand it, what was going on with that particular monorail project was that the Allweg company, who is the company that ostensibly built the Disneyland monorail, but really they just kind of took some plans and built it on their own. But the Allweg company was trying to make inroads in the United States, and they decided that Los Angeles was going to be a perfect place to install a monorail, and it was really going to take off. Right. And it makes a lot of sense. And they were basically going to give it to the city for free. They were going to take some sort of fare payment, but they weren't going to charge Los Angeles anything to build it. Because it was going to be good press for them. Yeah. They were like, look, we've connected Los Angeles, and they would let the fares pay them slowly over time. And I don't know how accurate this is, but evidently there was some sort of lobbying from the gas companies or tire companies or something like that shot it down. So I think maybe part of Bradbury's frustration and why he was so focused on it was, hey, this is a free thing for my city. It's going to be great. And seeing it shut down, I think, infuriated him.
Yeah. We weren't going to get pneumatic people tubes, so we were definitely going to try and get it.
It's that kind of science fictional vision of the future. It's I don't know if you've ever seen Logan's Run.
Oh yeah.
The sort of it's a really very corny model of the domed city that they keep showing in the film. That is the vision that he would have grown up with. Not from Logan's Run, but from the pulp magazines, which were full of those sort of city design.
Gernsback and all those illustrators, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, this kind of leads me to another thing I was going to bring up. I recall actually on your podcast, Phil, a while back, talking about Bradbury being accused, or you'll correct this story for me, but I think his publisher had put out something that suggested that he might be anti-technology, and he had to sort of lay down the law and say, no, I'm not. And it occurred to me, actually, when I heard that, I was like, this is interesting because in a way, a lot of science fiction writers from the 50s and 60s, truly great science fiction writers, were a little bit anti-technology. They were cautionary tales. Exactly. So I don't think that was wrong. But what's interesting to me is that there seems to be an arc from, yes, they are sort of cautionary tales, to, especially when you get to Ray working on things like EPCOT Center, where he seems to be a true, pure, optimistic futurist. And do you see that as an arc, or do you see it as sides of the same thing?
It is a definite arc, but it's quite complicated how he moved from position A to position B. I think he always had those two mindsets going in, because, as you say, science fiction is full of cautionary tales, but science fiction is also full of optimistic visions of the future. And I think he always held those two elements within him. I think, though, that his early stories, the ones that were successful, tended to be the ones that were a bit dark, or that had some kind of twist, or that were a severe warning to us all. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't anti-technology. He was just wanting people to be mindful of what they were doing. So if you take a story like The Veldt, which is the one about the children's nursery, where these parents pay for this complicated virtual reality room. This is written in 1950, I think.
Wow.
They build this room, or buy this room for their children. The children can go in there. They can play in any world they want. And of course, what the children do is they conjure up things from their imagination, including lions and tigers and all sorts of things. And the parents end up being consumed by the lions. Sorry to spoil the story for anyone. But that story, people say, oh, anti-technology, he's anti this virtual reality thing. Well, the story isn't about virtual reality. What it's about, in my view, is bad parenting. It's precisely about those parents who would take their children, plonk them down in front of the TV, and then go off and do something more interesting while the TV was entertaining the kids. So he was just taking that and being metaphorical about it, setting it in the future, extrapolating a trend to its logical negative conclusion. That's not because he's against the technology. It's because, careful folks, this is what this will end up as if you don't use it sensibly. So that was always there, and I think that's where he was getting his early success. But then I think as time went on, you got a different kind of Bradbury. You got Bradbury the essayist. From about the mid-50s onwards, he was not only selling fiction, he was selling essays to magazines. And probably, I'm speaking out of turn in a way here, because I don't actually know this, but I'm guessing he probably got paid just as much for an essay that he could type out in half an hour as he would for a short story that he had laboured over for a couple of weeks. And as time went on, he started writing screenplays for Hollywood and is selling the rights to his books to Hollywood. And he made a good income from this stuff. He often said that he selling the options on his books to Hollywood is what put his daughters through college. So he found, and I'm not trying to make it sound as if he was purely about the money, because he wasn't. But I think there came a point in his career where he found that the money would come in for relatively little effort, and the story writing was getting harder and harder because he kind of used up a lot of his best ideas. And so I think as we get into the 60s and the 70s, you see the emergence of Bradbury, the public figure, the public speaker, the interviewee, the lecturer. And if you look at some of those public performances, he's very good. He's very persuasive. Even sometimes he's talking stuff that is a bit, well, hang on, Ray. I don't really see how that's going to work. But he's so persuasive. That video of him pre-EPCOT talking to, I think, businessmen, mostly about what EPCOT can be about and how we're all going to work together on this. He goes through some crazy ideas of his, some of which are beautiful, some of which are a bit disjointed. But that he's almost like a preacher in that. He gets quite shouty at times. At times he's like a politician who's telling you this is how things have got to be in the future, you know. So it's a different aspect of his personality which is being given permission to come out, I think, in that era, which really stretches from the 60s through to the end of his career, really. So, and I think what he found is that he was more in demand to speak optimistically as a visionary. So that's why that second half of his career, he seems to have become an optimist. But I think he always had that as part of him in the early days, except he wasn't writing stories like that in the early days. He was writing these cautionary tales.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because it's certainly fun to look at science fiction stories from the 30s and 40s that are sort of early space operas, and they're, with Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and they're fun for sure, but there's not a ton of meat on the bone. Mm-hmm. And I think once the writing of science fiction becomes more sophisticated, they have to be cautionary. That is almost the point.
Yeah.
I mean, Fahrenheit 451, written in 1953, is that correct? Roughly then?
Yeah.
You have to understand, I mean, you think of it like he's a reflection of his time. And I think of 1953 kind of trepidatiously because, first off, his stories were starting to get ripped off by EC Comics. And then he busted them because he was very good at that. Hold on a second. Wait a second. This is a very good story, but it reminds me a lot of another story that I wrote one time. Could you please send me royalties? It was this very, very direct but very polite way of getting you. So they actually started putting, written by Ray Bradbury, but 1953, this is the time in which the Senate subcommittee hearing on juvenile delinquency is going on, and you have comic book burnings going on. And I'm sure that actually seeing his own name on covers like Weird Fantasy and Vault of Horror, etc., being incinerated, certainly probably brought back memories of Nazi book burnings during World War II and leading to Fahrenheit 451 of him going, hold it, wait a second, I'm operating in this realm. So those types of cautionary things are very, very personal to him.
Yes. And also, of course, the McCarthy hearings.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Which didn't directly affect Ray because he was never called to testify or anything, but a lot of his friends were affected directly or indirectly. Mm-hmm. And he thought it absolutely outrageous that people were being called to rat on each other. So he was really disturbed by that. He took out, I think, a full-page ad in some magazine, probably Variety or something like that, condemning McCarthy.
I didn't know that.
That's cool.
That in itself could have got him in some trouble. But he knew when and where to take a stand. And so all of that was feeding into Fahrenheit 451. Plus, of course, general Cold War anxieties, the fear that we're going to be blown up at any moment. And I think it's probably in the 60s when the space program really takes off that he begins to feel a bit more confident again because obviously World War II ends with the atomic bomb, and that was a big shock to the science fiction field in a way, but also a validation of it because a lot of science fiction writers had been writing about super bombs and super weapons. So the people in the field of science fiction were kind of vindicated when the atomic bombs were made public. And also in World War II, you've got Wernher von Braun's V2 rocket, which is every science fiction fan's dream was rockets that could fly just like that.
It's just where they land that's the problem.
That's right. That's right. But by the time you get to the 60s, of course, that rocketry is being used for peace. I mean, it's also being used in weaponry as well. But the colossal achievement of the Apollo program is where Ray really felt vindicated as a science fiction writer because all this stuff that people have been saying, that's silly stuff, going into space, silly stuff. All of a sudden, in the 60s, wow, I was right all along. Basically what he was able to say, as other science fiction writers were as well. So again, that's part of that shift from being, oh my God, we've got these dreadful technologies which we've foreseen. Science fiction writers are partly to blame for these bombs and my God, to wow, we've left our own planet, everything we've ever dreamed. So, I can see reasons for a shift, if there was a shift in his outlook, really.
Yeah. And this sort of takes us to, I'm glad you brought up that speech, the one that he gave in I think it was 1975, because it's an incredibly optimistic speech.
Yeah.
It's quite powerful. There's some stuff in it that is of its time, where you're like, okay, but it's quite moving, and as I understand it, it really kicked the EPCOT project back into gear. It was a project that had all but died at that point. Walt Disney having passed away, and it was, what they were trying to do is actually build a functioning city. And when Disney passed away, they really couldn't keep the propulsion going for that. It was just going to involve too much civic work, too much government work, too much planning, and things started to die. So they had to figure out another way to go with it. But Bradbury coming in, he feels like a full-fledged futurist at that point. And it's really powerful. He makes that speech. The project gets kicked back into gear. A few years later, I don't know how much he's actually doing on the project for a while, but it's pretty clear that once they hit up near 80, he's involved.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know much about this time?
I do. And what I know basically comes from the documents that I've seen in Bradbury's papers, which are held in Indianapolis. And in there, among the many, many files, are his ideas for EPCOT, which are all, of course, centered around Spaceship Earth, which, for the people who aren't particularly familiar with it, the famous white sphere that you always see whenever anyone talks about EPCOT, they always show this sphere. It's kind of the symbol of EPCOT. That was Spaceship Earth, and inside it was Spaceship Earth, I don't know what you call it, a ride or attraction.
It is a ride. You go through the history of communication.
The spiraling inclinator.
Yes.
And so Ray wrote that, basically. I mean, he created the idea for it, and he wrote the dialogue that you hear as you travel through it. And he started work on that in 1976. Yeah. So shortly after the speech that we've just been talking about, which was 75, the earliest documents I've seen relating to it are from 76. And 77 is when he begins to approach a kind of a final draft of the idea. And then I think it passes to the Imagineers, or whatever they were called in those days, to develop it as a practical proposition. And obviously there were changes made as it went through that. So more or less after that meeting, he was putting ideas on paper and working them through. And pretty much the Spaceship Earth ride, as it became, is what he wrote. It is what he proposed. They've modified it over the years. I think it's had about 3 facelifts.
I think they're doing one right now, actually.
Right. And every time they've replaced the narration because they've wanted to add things. And the only way of doing that would be we can't get whoever it was last time.
Right, Jeremy Irons.
We'll have Judi Dench this time. Yeah. Yep. So each time.
She, I think she's about to be replaced, though, because they're replacing the narration again.
Yeah.
Eddie Deason.
Welcome to Spaceship Earth.
Oh, no.
Thank the Estonians for their contributions to language.
What? No.
The Lowdown on the Plus Up is a Boardwalk Times podcast. At boardwalktimes.net, you'll find some of the most well-considered and insightful writing about the Walt Disney Company, Disney history, and the universe of theme parks available anywhere. Come join us at boardwalktimes.net.
But the interesting thing for me is with Spaceship Earth, as with the time maze concept, is Ray, he comes up with a narrative and the kind of what you will see and hear as you go through this experience. But he does also address what happens as you enter the building and what happens when you leave. He doesn't just write the show. He also thinks about audience flow, how to keep people occupied and interested while they're really just queuing up to get in.
Right.
And what they're going to do when they're released, because you don't want them to just run off somewhere else and forget what they've experienced. You want to somehow consolidate what they've learned or what they've been shown. So you give them some interactivity to think about, you know. And it tends to be, I mean, I haven't been to EPCOT for years. It's probably had at least one facelift since I went in there. But my understanding from having read detailed descriptions of the various scenarios over the years, it tends to be those beginning and end bits that Disney have changed. And the middle bit hasn't changed a huge amount.
But, you know, it's interesting because you talk about that, the sort of sealing off of the experience by having something as you leave. That seemed to be an important part of early EPCOT, at least. Pretty much everything you did emptied into something that was more like a science fair or more like interactive screens to do exactly that. And I wonder how much of that came from Bradbury.
Yeah, I'd like to know that as well. Even the earliest drafts I've seen include those kind of topping and tailing of the experience. But it may be that came out of Ray's discussions with the Disney people, you know, because he very much believed in sitting down with them and giving them his blue sky thinking, and they would say, well, yeah, but maybe we could do it this way. And they would give him this kind of practical understanding, which he would then build into his later drafts. So as I say, the documentation I've seen does include the pre and post activities in a very rudimentary form, but that doesn't mean to say that's where the ideas began. They may have begun in a meeting. They may have begun in a phone call. And there's no documentation of it, and Ray's not here to ask anymore. And we don't know precisely who he was talking to at the time. I mean, there were certain key people, but
he's very much like a sponge, I find, in his writing. And maybe please correct me if I'm wrong, or at least I'd love to hear your observation on that. It seems that Ray, you know, definitely picks up new techniques, new ways of thinking. He's very open-minded to that sort of thing. So at first, when he's working with the pulps, he's very open to that type of style of writing and those types of ideas and concepts. And then he moves into the comics industry, and you have something very similar. And then he branches off into film and television, you know, having to endure John Huston's ragging for a while in Ireland, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then he finally comes back. And he's very transformed. Like his work transforms after his Hollywood connections, you know, and his filmic connections. And it wouldn't surprise me that hanging around Walt Disney a lot certainly rubbed off on him in a way where he's like, wow, this is a whole new way of storytelling. I can't just do it with my typewriter, but I don't have access to anything else, so I'm just going to do it with my typewriter.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he did absorb ideas from elsewhere. He was never one of those writers who believed that he was the only one who had good ideas. You know, he believed that they could come from elsewhere. You were talking about Huston. Huston is the classic example of a film director who was also a writer, who wanted to collaborate with Ray, but then changed Ray's words. And that always rubbed Ray up the wrong way. If you employed him to write your film, he wanted to write your film. When it came to the theme park stuff, I think it was so obviously a collaborative form that he would sit down with these people who knew the technical stuff because he knew he didn't know the technical stuff. So he would come up with the fantastical idea, and then basically look at them and say, how can we do that? And they,
Right.
I don't know. So there does seem to be a difference in how he responded to being rewritten by producers and directors, and how he collaborated with Imagineers and similar people. But it may be that the Disney people were more respectful of him. I have read, for instance, that he found working with technical people, with engineers, much easier than working with other writers, because every writer thinks they can second guess you.
Right.
Whereas an engineer won't try and second guess your idea. They'll try and facilitate your idea.
Yeah.
The one exception to that I know of is when he worked with the Smithsonian with an idea for the Air and Space Museum. And he wrote this, essentially it's a planetarium show that he wrote. And he got a ton of feedback from these astronomy people who said, no, that's not how the sun is created. No, that's not where planets come from. No, that's not how life begins. And in each case, he'd written something metaphorical about the sun birthing the planets, or whatever. So he'd written these metaphorical things, and the scientists were taking them literally, saying, no, that's not correct. So he had a hard time working with those people. Although his planetarium show that he didn't get to work with the Smithsonian, he then sold to somebody else, and it was put on in California instead.
So that's why it explains the plaque out in front of the Griffith Park Observatory. Everybody welcome except Ray.
No, it's interesting. It reminds me of, there was an old ride at Disneyland, long gone now, that Pete and I have talked about before. It was a ride called Adventure Through Inner Space. And it was sponsored by Monsanto. And
oh boy.
And it was supposed to be about how atoms and molecules formed everything in the world. The designers of that ride started kind of building it up, and when you talk about these things, they have to be metaphorical. You can't really show that kind of scale. And Monsanto kept coming into them and saying, no. This is not how this works. And finally, the designers had to just shut them down and say, look, it's a metaphor. I can't like make an atom this, size of the Empire State Building. I don't have room.
We only have styrofoam and glitter. Like, give me a break.
Yeah. So I'm curious, like, kind of in this EPCOT period, and also I know that Ray worked a little with design for the park that I believe is now called Disneyland Paris, but was at the time called Euro Disney. Yeah. Do you know of ideas or things that he worked on that weren't used?
Not for Disney, no. I'm pretty sure that what we got is what he wrote. I don't think there were any major proposals that were shelved or anything. Having said that, for Euro Disney or Disneyland Paris, as far as I know, the only thing he worked on was the Orbitron.
Yes, that's what I
kind of a Jules Verne style rocket ride.
Yeah,
which isn't that complicated, really. It's not something with a narrative particularly. It's just a ride, as far as I can see.
Yeah, but it's pretty.
Oh, it is. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I haven't been there, but I have seen, there's a walkthrough video on YouTube, which has been done very well without any narration or anything. It's literally somebody walking slowly with a camera through it and going through the ride multiple times. So you get a really good sense of what it is.
Yeah.
But I find it hard to believe what Ray's input to that would have been, because there isn't really a script for that.
Right.
The only thing that I've seen relating to the Orbitron is that the designers at one point were saying, we're struggling to make it feel that the rockets are going very fast, because they're just going around in a circle, basically.
Right.
Fairly slow. It's a fairly sedate ride. And there are these sort of planets going around in a kind of I can't say this word, orrery arrangement.
Oh, yeah, it's a hard word. Orrery?
Orrery.
Like in the Dark Crystal.
I love those cookies. Yeah.
And apparently Ray said, well, if you made the planets go the other way to the way the rockets are going, they'll appear to be going twice as fast. And Yeah, brilliant idea.
Yeah,
And
brilliant.
they seem to have built that into it. Although if you look at the actual orbitron, there are some planets that go one way and some that go the other. So, whether they really did take Ray's idea on board or not, I don't know. But it is alleged that that's what happened.
Now you say not for Disney, but are there other rides, theme park things that he worked on that didn't get used, other than the Great Electric Time Maze?
Yeah, there are loads. I have to tell you this. I was researching in the Bradbury Center in, I'm going to say 2014. I may be a little bit out there, but I was there at a certain time, which was just a few months after all of Bradbury's materials were shipped to Indianapolis, where the Bradbury Center is.
Right.
Ray died in 2012. He left his papers to the Bradbury Center, and that's where the papers are now, all shipped across from California to Indianapolis in the original filing cabinets so that Ray's filing system was preserved. I was the first person to go through all of the cabinets. They were still wrapped in plastic when I was there.
Wow.
I was given permission to unveil them, and the only restriction placed on me was if you take anything out, put it back exactly where you found it. Okay, I'll do that. And so I was there primarily to look for scripts because I was focusing on Ray's screenplays, his film work, his TV work.
Right.
But every time I came across anything that was narrative that I hadn't seen before, I would make a note of it. So here are my notes. And some of these things have no context to them. They're in a file and you think, what's this? So there is one. Oh, let me get the right page here. There is one called Aviopolis.
Okay.
All that is there in the file is just one page, and it's page 3 of some document. And we don't know how long the document should have been, or what was on page 1 or page 2. It doesn't say what it is. It just says Aviopolis. It's in Ray's handwriting, Aviopolis, and there's this one page sort of randomly taken from a script. And it looks like it might be for the Air and Space Museum, the Smithsonian maybe, or some other Air and Space Museum. Don't know.
Wow.
Very mysterious, but it's some kind of experience that involves people traveling up escalators as they learn about the history of aviation. That's all we get for that one. There's one called Chartship Universe, where the only page that I found is page 1. So the rest of the thing isn't there. We just get an introduction to it. And this is some kind of ride that you would, there'd be some kind of pre-ride activity, and then you'd get in the ride and you'd basically be taken through the universe. I don't know how far you would get because there's only one page of it there. I'm not sure who this was for. Probably was for Douglas Trumbull. You know, the guy who did the special effects for 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed the film Brainstorm and Silent Running.
We ran into him when we talked about the Back to the Future ride at Universal because he directed that film.
We even mentioned him. That's bizarre because we even mentioned him in the Time Maze episode doing some of the effects for the time thing. And I had no clue that this is what this was for. This is hysterical. That's awesome.
So Doug Trumbull was had a company that specialized in these rides. He was an early pioneer of motion control electronics, which probably came from his effects work originally, like building motion control cameras for the, I don't know whether it wouldn't have been the Star Wars films, probably for Close Encounters or something. So he developed all of this stuff for entertainment purposes. And of course, he was also a pioneer of high definition video. And so that would have been built into some of these ride things that he worked on with Ray and with other people.
I got to do one of his show scan theater films once, because one of the first ones was in Texas, where I grew up. So I got to see it. I think one of 10 people who ever actually saw them functioning.
Brilliant. So there's a couple of things for Trumbull in the Bradbury papers. But again, with very little context, you don't know where this would go, or whether it was just a blue sky thing, or whether it was a kind of a genuine script for a real ride that did turn up somewhere.
Yeah.
It's really hard to pin down. I think what is needed is for somebody, and I don't have the energy to do this, but somebody needs to go into the Trumbull archive, if there is one,
Right.
and find his side of the discussion,
To put them together.
In the Bradbury papers, you only get the Bradbury side of things mostly. He doesn't
Right.
always copy incoming documents. He mostly just stores his own document. Then there's that thing that I mentioned earlier for the Smithsonian, which variously was called Great Shout of the Universe, or I think just Universe or something like that. And then there are all sorts of things that he did for, I'm going to say, large-scale video walls, which is, again, one of these sort of big technologies of the 80s and 90s, the idea that you could put together a huge screen out of lots of monitors. And he wrote a number of experiences that were for display on these. And in those cases, I never found any documents about them, but I did find video recordings where people had basically, as a test, they'd set the video wall running and then they'd set a camera up and filmed the whole thing so that people could have a look, have a representation of what it would look like. And of course, this is all low definition VHS video, because it's from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
So there's a whole load of this stuff that Bradbury was doing, and very little of it came to a final product, as far as I know.
Yeah.
But I think it's if there's anybody listening to this, whoever wants to do a PhD, this is something that would be a fantastic research project, because there is a ton of material in the files, but it needs somebody to study it carefully, more carefully than I have, and piece it together and come up with a timeline and figure out who Ray was interacting with, Trumbull or Marty Sklar at Disney or whoever it was. I think there could be a book in that.
Sounds like a challenge.
Absolutely. I'm really suggesting that somebody do that, please. Somebody.
It would be so interesting. So just to investigate Ray's activities in experiential art.
Yes.
Which he obviously was fascinated by.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way, it is similar to his work in film, because if you look at Bradbury's published output, he was a prolific author from the late 1940s. Well, no, sorry, from about 1940 onwards. His output began to decline in terms of quantity, not quality, but in terms of quantity, began to decline in the late 50s. During the 60s, he didn't publish many books. 70s, not many books. Has a bit of a comeback in the 80s with books, but his career looks like it's disappeared. But what's actually happened is that in the 60s, he started writing poetry, some of which was published. He started writing plays and producing his plays. He started working in Hollywood. And a lot of these resulted in projects that have no shelf life. So the Hollywood scripts weren't filmed. So they just disappear, effectively. The plays were staged, but when a play's finished, it's gone. I mean, you can publish the book of the play, obviously, but nobody reads those, really.
Wasn't there a collection of his Fahrenheit 451 scripts put out recently?
Yes, there was.
A year or so?
That's right, yeah. So, and these tended to come out over the last couple of decades in limited edition books from small presses. So you can find them. You can find Bradbury's film scripts nowadays. But to the average reader who just, goes into a Barnes and Noble or whatever, it looks as if Bradbury stopped writing in about 1960. He didn't at all. He was writing constantly, but he was doing it for non-book projects. And there's a whole load of these rides and experiences which, with the exception of EPCOT, have just evaporated. So
it's interesting you mentioned all these scripts that disappeared. One of his more famous books, and also something that lives on in Disneyland, was actually spawned out of a script that he originally wrote, which is The Halloween Tree. It originally started off as a script in 1967 with Chuck Jones. And it didn't come to fruition until much, much later. Hanna-Barbera produced a very version of it. I honestly think that like Leica or Aardman, some sort of stop motion animation studio would do a great job of doing an adaptation of the Halloween tree. So if you guys are listening, go to it. But he published it as a book in 1972, and eventually in 2007. Ray collaborated with a historian and writer named Tim O'Day, whom I've done some business with in the past, in erecting a tree. And originally they were going to build like some sort of elaborate fiberglass tree with all of the pumpkins with Mr. Mound Shroud somewhere in the side of it. But now it's just a tiny little tree with orange lights in it, in Frontierland. But Ray visited it over and over again. It's great. It's a nice little touch, It's a nice little touch to Frontierland.
This is actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Pete, because just last week I saw a thing that Tim O'Day had posted about, I gather that Disney is about to start streaming Something Wicked This Way Comes again, because it had not been available for a long time. And he made a post about it. And Phil, he posted a link to your podcast where you spoke, I guess your 3 podcasts where you broke down the history of Something Wicked This Way Comes. Yeah. So I thought that was a nice synchronicity.
Yeah, I mean, both of those, Halloween Tree and Something Wicked, are examples of, in a way, of Ray recycling unused projects, because Something Wicked started out as a film script that never got made, so he turned it into a novel, and then he turned the novel into a film script again.
Idea after idea, yeah.
And Halloween Tree, as you say, was a script, didn't sell, turned it into a book, and then the book became a script, which became a film. So there's a process of recycling going on there, but always creative. He never... With one or two exceptions, he never slavishly translates something from one form to another. He always, it's as if he kind of reads the story and says, right, yeah, okay, that's the story, puts it down, and then types everything afresh. So now I'm going to write a script, and I've got that story in my head, but I'm not retyping that story. I'm telling a new story based on what I've just read, and off he goes. So you nearly always get something different when he recycles. He will recycle, but always with added value, or nearly always with added value. But the specific case of Halloween Tree reminds me, as I was looking through the Time Maze script again, and some of the other scripts, like the EPCOT Spaceship Earth script, I was reminded that the Halloween Tree is the same sort of thing. The story of the Halloween Tree is basically a bunch of kids, Halloween time, one of their friends goes missing, and they have to travel through time to try and rescue him. And that is essentially the plot of the Time Maze, I think.
Yeah, the second maze,
Yeah. So it's one of his go-to ideas, is to have this kind of search and rescue operation with time travel. And in the case of the Halloween Tree, what they do is they go back to Halloween in the past. So they look at the origins of Halloween. They look at for some reason I can't remember, they look at the building of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris.
It's all about the origins of why each kid is dressed, and so one of them is Quasimodo. And so it's like, let's climb up the cathedral, and blocks form underneath their feet as they're running. And I'm sorry, I read this book once a year at Halloween. So I'm a big nerd for this one. But I saw that when we got to the October Country portion of the Time Maze area, and I went, and that's when I had a very similar realization, like, wait a minute, that sounds like the same plot. And a lot of authors, we talked about his influences, it makes you wonder what happened in his past. That makes you think, like, was there a kid that went missing? And if so, did he have some sort of fantasy as a child? Like, maybe I could go back in time and find this kid. And it just kind of stuck with him, and it just, like a song you can't get out of your head. He keeps coming back to that.
I don't like to psychoanalyze authors usually, but have you ever heard of his story, The Lake?
No, I don't think I have heard of this one.
Remind me what that is.
One of his early stories from about 1943, I think. And it's basically it centers around a girl
she gets
on
lost.
the
That's
beach
right.
of Lake Michigan. She's building a sandcastle with her little friend. She goes into the lake and she never comes back until 30, 40 years later. The man goes back to his childhood home. He's on the beach and somebody's found something in the water and it's all covered in seaweed. And, I'll leave listeners to go and find that story. But that apparently was based on a real incident from Bradbury's childhood.
Wow.
Somebody went, I don't know if it was somebody that he knew personally, but it was something that happened where he lived, that a girl went missing in the lake. So years later, it becomes the basis of this story where he's sort of reminiscing about his childhood. And it may be that the missing character in The Halloween Tree, which I think is Pipkin, possibly.
Yeah.
It may be that he's the same character, essentially. He's somebody who's gone missing in childhood.
It's interesting.
Put the world to rights.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of his story, I See You No More, where it's about extradition of a person by immigration forces in the 50s. And it was like based off of a neighbor of his that got deported during the Great Purges in Los Angeles. And, a friend of his being taken away, never seen again. It's a heart-wrenching story.
There's also a story called John Huff's Leave Taking, which is about two 12-year-olds and John Huff is the friend of the narrator or the focal character of the story. And John Huff is leaving. His family is going to another town. And it's basically the heartbreak of this little 12-year-old kid losing his best friend.
Yeah.
Not because of anything evil that's happened, but just because, this is what happens in life. And that's a very, very touching story. And in that particular instance, Ray spoke about that story and said that, well, it's essentially a true story, but it was actually the other way round in real life. That in real life, he was the one who went away, leaving his friend in the lurch.
Yeah.
But for fictional purposes, he sort of took the opposite point of view and showed what it's like when your best friend leaves you.
What a great explanation of empathy. That's so good.
Which is, I suppose, really in an intensified way what something wicked ultimately is. It's about, is your best friend going to be pulled away from you?
Oh, yeah. It certainly is. Yeah.
I think that the thing I struggle with the film version of Something Wicked, which I like, is that it seems to have reframed the story to be a story about a son and a father. Yeah, and I don't feel like that's what the story was.
Jason Robards was gunning for an Oscar. You know it.
I mean, that's the awkward thing with the film is that Robards, I think, is very good. He's incredibly good.
And so is Jonathan Pryce.
The duel in the library is one of the more chilling conflicts between good and evil I've ever seen on film. It still works so good with his resistance and every time.
Even if you don't know anything about those characters, if you just show that scene out of context, the visual presentation of it, the ripping the pages out of the book, beautifully done.
Yeah.
Clearly the key scene in the film. It's perfect.
Hey everybody, Kelly here. Sorry to interrupt. Aside from all of the cool stuff that's going on Boardwalk Times right now, I also have an article coming out on Fanfare. Should be coming out pretty much the same day that this drops. So if you want to go, if you have any interest at all in reading about Orson Welles reading poetry on the radio and how that affected the rest of his career, I'm going to hook you up. Check out fanfare.pub. Fanfare.pub for that. Now back to Kelly, Pete, and Dr. Phil Nichols.
Let's talk about Ray and Walt Disney, which I don't think we've really discussed at all. What's your take on that relationship?
I think in many ways they were kindred spirits because they believed in many of the same things in terms of what is entertaining. And Disney, of course, although he made these films that people think of as light entertainment, there are some very dark Disney films. You know, Bambi is as dark as you get.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And that really echoes Ray as well. Ray is an entertaining storyteller, but with a tremendous streak of darkness running through what he does. So I can see a lot of commonality there. And the reality of it, I looked in some of the biographies of Bradbury today just to remind myself of the sort of the time scale. But it appears that Bradbury first met Disney in 1964, and they met in a department store, just purely randomly. Ray says he was doing Christmas shopping with his kids, and across the aisle there was Walt Disney carrying a whole pile of boxes that he'd just been buying. And Ray goes up to him and introduces himself. And Disney says, "Oh, I know who you are. I've read your books." So there's a kind of an instant, oh my God, he knows me.
Yeah.
Let's go to the food court. Yeah.
I mean, at this point, Disney was quite a well-known face because he was on TV all the time, you know, and not just his work was on TV. He was on TV as the host.
He was a character. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Ray wasn't that kind of personality at that point. So Ray would have recognized Disney, but Disney wouldn't have recognized Ray, I don't think.
Yeah.
But Disney, apparently, according to Ray, and I've no reason to doubt this, Disney invited him to lunch the next day. So Ray turned up at Disney's office. They sat apparently at a little card table, and they had soup and sandwiches. And Ray was given 1 hour. Apparently there was a secretary who said, you must stick to time, Mr. Bradbury. Don't distract Mr. Disney. And Ray was supposed to have an hour, and they had their hour. And then Disney said, "Let me show you some stuff." And he takes Bradbury on a tour of the studio, and he shows him the animatronics. He shows him the animatronic Lincoln. The Abraham Lincoln animatronic that was just being worked on at that time, which Ray then goes and writes a story about.
Oh, which story is that?
It's called Downwind from Gettysburg.
Nice.
It is basically the Disney animatronic Lincoln who gets assassinated.
Oh, wow.
Oh, terrific. So they had this one meeting. According to one of the biographies, I think it's John Eller's biography of Ray. He wrote 3 volumes of a biography of Ray. I think it's in his book. They never met socially or outside of Disney's office. So although they called each other friends and they spoke several times over the years, they only apparently ever met in Disney's office, always at the little card table, probably always with the salad and soup. But of course, Disney only lived till 66. So they just knew each other personally for a couple of years there. But I think Kelly, what you were saying earlier on is that with EPCOT, there was this kind of drive to either kill the project after Disney had died, or to do something that would truly honor him. And I think Ray very much felt that the thing to do was to honor the man. So he always spoke very positively of Disney as a person. But beyond those little meetings they had, they didn't interact a huge amount. Ray mostly interacted with people who worked for Disney. So he interacted with Disney's brother, I think, and a lot of the technical people, but very little with Disney himself. But they seem to have got on really well, as far as I know.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we talked about that 1975 speech, and I mean, I'm probably projecting a little bit here, but there does seem to be a tenor that Bradbury has, which is, I knew Walt. I was friends with Walt. I am hanging on to the legacy of Walt, and I'm going to make sure that you don't mess it up. And he doesn't say that exactly, but he does say, I'm going to be watching you.
Yes.
which is very interesting.
I was going to say my favourite part of that speech is when he goes off on a tangent about money. Because he says something like, a lot of you are saying that money is an obstacle here. He goes off on this rant of how money originated, and he comes up with this theory that the way all money has ever worked is that you do the job and then you get paid. So in the case of this EPCOT thing, let's do the work and then we'll worry about the money later. And in a sense, he's absolutely right. If you believe in a thing, you ought to commit to doing it. But as somebody who's had to bid for funding for things in the past, I do think you can't get away with that, Ray. You can't just spend millions on developing something and then say, well, now let's have the money. You've got to have some of that money there.
Maybe he should have told that to, we should tell that to the current company of Disney. Just saying.
But it's profound when he says it in that speech. It feels very, very moving. You're like, yes, of course you're right. We should just do what we believe in, and then the money will come.
Absolutely. Well, and to give Walt, credit for a quote that Ray loved to quote him on, was one of the first things that he remembers Walt ever telling him, which is nothing has to die. And that's evocative of both men, frankly, I feel. I mean, from a emotional and a creative point of view. I mean, we talked about how Ray recycled his ideas, so nothing really died with him. But but we're still talking about these guys because they both, in their own ways and together, actually had a very profound effect on the world around us. And that's not really an exaggeration. I mean, we've already talked about how Disney's creative approach, especially in his later years. We won't talk about Disney, the huckster years, but we will definitely talk about his the Epcot and Disneyland era. Definitely did usher in how rapid transit was viewed and how political points of view were viewed, how Ronald Reagan was elected, things like that. That definitely have influence. And the same thing with Ray Bradbury. His writings, were in some ways, we are still talking about them because they are still very, very relevant. In the current climate that we have here in America, we are constantly bringing up two books, 1984 and Fahrenheit 451. They're both coming up. And they are warnings for a reason, is because that they really strike a chord within all of us. And so I guess Walt's quote, nothing has to die, is very, very true.
I would add a third book there, by the way. I would add The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
With those three, you've got the whole thing covered.
That's it. I agree.
I might also add The Parable of the Sower, which... is almost too realistic. Almost like, oh no, we're actually doing that now. That's not even cautionary anymore.
Yeah. No kidding.
Well, this seems like a pretty good place to start drawing it to a close. Is there anything we haven't covered that either of you would like to touch on?
Actually, something we didn't talk about really is World's Fairs.
Oh, yes.
Oh, that's very interesting because Bradbury, did he not work on what we like to call the not a 1964 World's Fair? Because it was an unsanctioned fair.
Yes.
He worked on the America Pavilion, is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So essentially, it's Spaceship Earth, but rather than talking about the whole human species, it's the history of America, basically.
Yeah.
It's a ride, but it's a very primitive one. Obviously, I wasn't there. It doesn't exist to look at it, but the script exists.
Wow.
And there are photos of it. And basically, people would get on these sort of kind of a trolley thing with lots of seating on, and it would travel along, and they would be towed past various screens and tableau in front of them, and experience a narrative of how America became what it is.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's his dry run. He didn't know this, but it was his dry run for Spaceship Earth in many ways.
Yeah.
But he was influenced by previous World's Fairs because he went to the Chicago World's Fair in 1933 and probably again in 34 because it ran for 2 years. And his aunt Neva, she was the creative one in the Bradbury family, and she's probably the one where he gets most of his creative DNA from, is not directly from his parents, but sideways from his aunt.
Yeah.
Who he spent a lot of time with her as a child. And she did some work on the Chicago World's Fair, and she took him along. So he experienced that when he was 12 or 13. And then in 1939, before he was an established author, he went off to New York to the World Science Fiction Convention, the first ever science fiction convention, which was scheduled to coincide with the 1939 World's Fair in New York. So while he was there for the convention, he also went to the World's Fair. So again, influenced by that, I don't know what he would have seen at that one, but
I can help. So one of the things that and I think, Phil, the first time I ever reached out to you was to ask if you could help me locate this piece of writing, and maybe I imagined it. But the 1939 World's Fair had a ride that was called Futurama.
Oh,
and
yes.
Futurama was similar to what you're describing with his American ride, where they basically put you in theater seats that were on chains and pulled through this alien landscape, and you're kind of circled around the alien landscape. And I seem to remember a piece where he had written about that. And then that ride, Futurama, was revised for the 1964 World's Fair. And there was a Futurama 2. It was a sequel ride. So it seems very likely to me that he at least experienced those.
Yes, almost certainly. Yeah, because he loved those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he would have done. I'll have to, I don't recall that piece of writing, but I'm sure you're right. So I will try and track that down. And if I didn't ever get back to you about it previously, I'll do so now.
You did, no,
I'm just committed to myself.
You were very kind and generous, and you said, "I don't know offhand, but I will see."
Well, I'll give the same answer now. Yeah. I see.
Oh, I'm on to you, Nichols. But there's the interesting thing about there's a lot that's interesting about the 1964 World's Fair. Much of what we think of as the modern theme park starts right there, especially with Disney, but obviously with Ray's participation in the American Pavilion. There's also, just to kind of wrap back to the beginning of our conversation, there were proposals for different World's Fairs around that time, and there were two that were very close to being greenlit. And the other one was to happen in Chicago again. And the Chicago World's Fair had a quite an elaborate proposal, and it was designed by Victor Gruen, who we talked about earlier, the father of the shopping mall. But so it's really interesting because a lot of what Victor Gruen designed for the 64 World's Fair, the Chicago one that was never actually built, looks a lot like what EPCOT became. There's strong similarities between the two.
Well, Gruen actually was quoted several times by Imagineers a lot with one of his books in his design for EPCOT, so that doesn't surprise me at all.
Oh, yeah, after Walt died, when they went through his library, they found a single book about urban design, and it was Victor Gruen's The Heart of Our Cities.
It all ties together, doesn't it?
It all comes around. It all comes around. So I think we've reached a point of our conversation here that we do on our show that I think I would love to actually have you participate in, Phil, if you don't mind, which is
you're going to put him on the spot.
I'm going to put him on the spot. You had heard our episode about the time maze. We do a thing with our show that's in our title, The Plus Up. And so it's without any consideration of budget, time, safety constraints, or whatever. Was there anything in the time maze that you would have added or changed? We'd love to hear your plus up on that.
Oh, anything I would have added or changed?
Or inspired you. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me give you an opposite of inspired first, and then maybe I'll come up with an inspired one when I'm
Great.
talking about that. One thing I noticed when I was reading about the time maze, and I think you kind of glossed over it when you were talking about it, and rightly so, because it wasn't that important. But much of what Ray put into that time maze is revisits of his greatest hits. So there's a dinosaur hunt, which is basically his story, A Sound of Thunder. There's people being flung out into space away from each other, which is basically his short story Kaleidoscope. And there's the October Country, which of course is a short story collection of his, and he puts that in there. What I would change, if Ray was sitting across the table from me now, I would say, Ray, you've got to give us something new. You can't just keep recycling. It's got a bad reputation.
We've done Mechanical Hounds.
Yes. Well, I think that's an awesome. That's actually a great note. It's like, Ray, come on.
Oh yeah, you're right. The Mechanical Hound was in there as well, wasn't it?
Yeah,
so that's Fahrenheit 451. Yeah. So
he wanted to give people some sort of magnetic belt where they would get a mild electric shock.
Yes,
touched by the Mechanical Hounds.
Which is really nice. I think that's
Well, some Disneyland patrons probably deserve it. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, that's like the Mr. Electrico, which you talked about last time, where Mr. Electrico would touch you with a sword and say, live forever, and you'd get a shock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's that kind of thing, which you're probably not allowed to do that kind of show anymore because you know, some people would have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Maybe at Universal, but not at Disney. Yeah.
But the thing that I sort of took as a real positive from the time maze is that consideration of the before, the during, and the after. So although he presents it as three mazes, it's really pre-show, show, and post-show. And it's that kind of structural thought, which I think is terrific. Because you go to a lot of shows that you can pay a lot of money for in theatres and whatever. And people don't give any consideration to what goes on before. They just play a bit of music over the PA system while you're sitting there waiting for the show to begin. But I like things like Cirque du Soleil, where before the show begins, they send clowns out into the audience. And it takes about 10 minutes. It takes about 10 minutes for people to realise, hang on, there's a clown. And start pointing. And, oh my God, it started. And of course it hasn't started, but they're giving you a little pre-show. And I like that. I like that people take into account what's going to happen before the show begins. And then how are we going to get people out at the end? Let's have something that isn't just everybody out. Let's have some method. And because leaving a theatre is a bit like getting off a plane. You know that you've got to wait for all those other people to get off before you can get off. It would be nice if there was something that entertained you while you were doing that. And I don't think Ray brought that to fruition, but he had considered it. And that's what I liked.
What about you, Pete?
Well,
do you have a
plus up for the time maze? I want to see it built. I would actually would like to see a version of this built, and especially with a revitalized interest in retrofuturism today and design, the Gucci style, etc. I would actually like to see that applied. So it actually does make it a Futurama 3 for all we care. But the very sweeping design and the very approach, and obviously because of his widespread imagination, we can't verbatim do everything that Ray intended into it, but doing a version of it really wouldn't be a bad thing. And especially today, where we've talked about this, Kelly and I, in our previous episodes, where there's almost a adversarial nature to going to theme parks these days. Where, like, as soon as you pay that high price ticket, it then becomes, you better give me all my money's worth or else. I think that something like the Time Maze would be structured. You had mentioned earlier about when you pay, what you don't pay for, when you are entering, like if you're entering a town, you're not paying for that experience, but you are paying for a restaurant, unless you're in Rome, which you pay for everything. But still, Ray's notion, I think, of introducing the optimism and not necessarily a full utopic approach, because that's just not feasible in today's economy. But I think introducing concepts that go beyond just mild entertainment are very, very possible with the Time Maze. And so even though this is kind of a wishy-washy, mealy-mouthed approach to a plus-up, that's actually the main concept I would like to see introduced to it. Would be, A, I'd love to see it done, but B, I would love to see some of Ray's optimism inserted in there to kind of bring back the optimism into a themed experience. So when you walk out, you feel better than when you entered.
Yes, I think that's great. I think that's how it should be. Incidentally, I don't know which version of the Time Maze you read, but I looked at a version that's in the Bradbury Center files, and it includes a preamble, which is basically a kind of a business account of what this thing will be. And it talks about the Time Maze requiring, I think it says 200,000 square feet of land. And it talks about how many of these there would be, and I think it's something like 6 across the US, 6 different locations, and others around the world. And there's sort of some just made up figures, I'm sure, but some figures suggesting how much this would generate. So it's not just an off the top of the head idea. I mean, it may have started as that, but it became a serious business proposition.
That's really cool.
Oh, and by the way, there are 3 names on that proposal. There's Bradbury, there's John Jurdy, who is the architect who I mentioned earlier, the shopping mall guy.
Yeah.
And the third one is, I've got to check my notes, make sure I get this right, John Decore, who is or was an art director, production designer from Hollywood, who worked on films such as South Pacific, right the way through to Ghostbusters in 1984.
Wow.
So there's some serious thought gone into it. It's not just Ray's proposal. It's got 2 other people behind it.
That's really cool.
That's fascinating. It never even crossed my mind that he thought of this as a serious possibility. I just read it and it was like, this is a flight of fancy. He read it real quickly and then walked away from it. It never occurred to me that he actually considered trying to build something like it.
That's wild.
That's amazing.
That's really, really wild.
Well, I think as we kind of draw this to a close, I want to, first off, thank you, Phil.
Yes.
Dr. Phil Nichols for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. It's been really delightful.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Is there anything you'd like to plug? Anything you'd like to sell? Anything?
Well, I would just suggest that if people are interested in Bradbury, have a listen to my podcast, Bradbury 100, or visit my website, which is bradburymedia.co.uk. And on there, you'll find links to all the other things that I do.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And we'll put those in the show notes, too. Folks, I listen to Bradbury 100, so you should, too.
Yep.
All right. So from me and Pete and Dr. Phil Nichols, this has been The Lowdown
on the Plus Up.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of The Lowdown on the Plus Up. If you have, please tell your friends where you found us. And if you haven't, we can pretend this never happened and need not speak of it again. For a lot more thoughts on theme parks and related stuff, check out my writing for Boardwalk Times at boardwalktimes.net.
Feel free to reach out to Pete and I at Lowdown on the Plus Up on Blue Sky, Mastodon, Instagram, and all the other socials. Or you can send us a message directly at comments@lowdown-plus-up.com. We really want to hear about how you'd plus these attractions up and read some of your ideas on the show. Our theme music is Goblin, Tinker, Soldier, Spy by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com. We'll have a new episode out real soon. Why? Because we like you.
I get a group of people together and have them trapped in a hall like this, I bring a poem, see? And you can't escape me. Luckily, it's a short poem, but it sums up some of my feelings on why I love space travel, why I write science fiction, why I'm intrigued with what's going on this weekend on Mars. And part of this has my philosophy about space travel in it, and if you'll permit, I'll read it to you. It's very, very short. The fence we walked between the years did balance us serene. It was a place half in the sky where in the green of leaf and promising of peach, we'd reach our hand to touch and almost touch the sky. If we could reach and touch, we said, 'twould teach us not to, never to, be dead. We ached and almost touched that stuff. Our reach was never quite enough. If only we had taller been and touched God's cuff, his hem, we would not have to go with them who've gone before, who, short as us, stood tall as they could stand, and hoped by stretching tall that they might keep their land, their home, their hearth, their flesh and soul. But they, like us, were standing in a hole. Oh, Thomas, will a race one day stand really tall across the void, across the universe and all, and measured out with rocket fire, at last put Adam's finger forth, as on the Sistine ceiling, and God's hand come down the other way to measure man and find him good and gift him with forever's day? I work for that. Short man, large dream. I send my rockets forth between my ears, hoping an inch of good is worth a pound of years. Aching to hear a voice cry back along the universal mall, we've reached Alpha Centauri. We're tall. Oh God, we're tall.